It's a real privilege to be able to share my ideas with you and to get your feedback. While I set my slides up, I'm not going to say a little bit about myself because I have got a slide where I talk about the influences on my book. But while I set my slides up, what I'd like you all to do, what I want to try and do with this, maybe I'm going to be talking for about 35 minutes, is I'd like you to participate with me. So I'd like to invite you all to get a pen and paper or pens, coloured pens if you've got them. And if you can fold your piece of paper into 6 so that you've got some squares to illustrate and to think about, that would be really good. So if you do that while I set my slides up. What I'm going to talk to you about today, briefly, is reflections on the research behind my book, Journey to Hopeful Futures, a Handbook. And the sort of themes I'm picking out is around climate change, community development, and collective action. And you can see the title is A Hopeful Future for All. And I think what I'd like to stress to you all is that what I'm doing in this book is making an offering of ideas and my journey. And then hopefully you can create your journey from it and you can use what's in the handbook to go forward. So what I'd like to do today is tell you a little bit about my own journey and invite you to make a map, which I'm doing now, and then tell you some of the tools I used for my learning and inquiry. And then I'd like to go forward into reflections, how I created the research, generating ideas, taking the book out. And then I have a set of paradigms in the book that I would really like to share with you all. And after that, I'll invite you to join the breakout rooms. And then we'll see about the time together, because I'd like to see what ideas are arising for you. So the first thing I'd like you to do is write somewhere on your piece of paper, Journey to Hopeful Futures, but maybe put hope in big letters, because I think obviously there is a lot of challenges in the world today, and what I'm trying to suggest is how we might journey to hopeful futures. The other thing to say to you, when you think about the creating and drawing and responding to me, do think about using images or stick people or shapes, or maybe you could draw animals or mountains or color or words. It's a little bit about your feelings. How do you feel about what I'm presenting? So just a tiny bit about my roots and where I come from. So my mother's family is from Southwest Caribbean Island, and that was very influential on me, both as a faith community, that's a very strong faith community there, but also very close to nature. But some of the other influences on me, you can see down in the left-hand corner, down at the bottom, a community event. I've spent a lot of my life working in community development, and for many years also as a manager of community development services when there was good funding. And the box on the middle left corner is me on a workshop. It was actually a workshop about how do we use spirituality and hopeful futures. And then the 2 children in the middle are my grandchildren, because family is very important to me. And down on the left-hand side is a picture of Saturn, and you'll see that space is also very important. So in terms of my book, it is quite a complex book, but it follows a journey. And I hope if you did become interested in it, and maybe you were able to read it, you would be interested in creating your own journey. So I do explore a little bit about what's going on for the planet at the moment, at what I call base camp. And then I suggest right at the beginning some emerging solutions. And I think my solutions that I'm offering is that we see ourselves as humanity, as part of wider paradigms, as part of our planet, but also part of our wider cosmos. So it's about seeing ourselves in bigger contents, I guess. But what's been very important for me is participatory learning. And I noticed that several of you talked about participatory research or participatory learning in your own communities. And I have a whole chapter exploring different forms of participatory learning. The particular methodology I've come to use is action research. I think we all find our own methodologies, and I will say a little bit about that. And I have personally particularly used first-person inquiry when you talk about yourself. And then I explore in chapter 3, learning to use, cycle 3, learning to use the tools, how we might use participatory learning, first-person inquiry, to learn to live more within our planet and our wider universe. But I also talk about how in communities, there are so many participatory approaches that we can undertake. And I've used a lot of them from world cafes to collective cooperative inquiry, different sorts of learning. And then in cycle 4, I delve deeper and I suggest that we can think about the earth and the earth dreaming. I think we often talk about our human dreams, but what would the earth dream for all her children? Because we are one part of the earth community. There are many parts to it. And then cycle 5 is love and a sacred universe. So engaging with qualities of love and spiritual qualities. And I explore a faith journey to see how I think that love and spiritual qualities are part of hopeful futures. And I do try and make space in my book for people who do not come from a faith community or who came from a faith community but no longer feel that talks to them. And then I talk about our cosmos and I use words like awesome to try and capture it. And then in the final cycle, I talk about how all these ideas have affected me as a community development manager, as a lecturer, and as a community activist. So that's a very short version of my book. I'm not able to talk about all that today, and I don't want to, but I did want to suggest to you all that I try and take people on a journey. And you'll see on the slide, there's the words resources. So through every chapter in the book, there are resources. There are signposts to other resources, be they video or books or online. There are invitations to reflect, which is more about thinking about what I've said. And then there are creative learning exercises. So what I've tried to do in the book is see it as a pathway that you might follow and you could create your own map. Now, I would like to say to you just a little bit about action research. Action research is a methodology. It's a participatory methodology, and it has what I call characteristics. And why I really like action research is that it's a way of learning that is very rooted in qualities that you can share with others. So it's not an ism, it's not dogmatic, but it is about having qualities for our learning. And if you see in these 9 boxes here, which I explore in detail in my book, at the bottom left box is participation, power, and democracy. So one of the things about action research is it always talks about power and democracy as essential characteristics of the societies we want. And then up at the top in the middle box, there's the words I, we, and bigger we. And so I use a lot in my book, first person action research, which is I, we, which is when we learn together. I hope we're a little bit of a we. And then the bigger world, which is the bigger world out there. And I just want to say on the right-hand box, in the middle, the flourishing. And I do think action research is very orientated towards the flourishing of human beings, but also the more than human world. And you might be saying, well, this sort of learning is fine, but maybe it's more academic learning. But for 10 years, I managed a social inclusion unit in Stockport. And one of the units we had was a learning unit, and we taught these ideas. And we would have used maybe different language, but we offered day courses, we offered workshops, and we offered them to frontline workers, to policy workers, to community activists. And the ideas did take root. And I have continued all the work that I did ceased to be funded in England, in the UK, in a period of austerity. But I do continue to teach and work with a group of colleagues, and we offer free online resources on action research. So one of the routes in my book is about first-person action research. And first-person action research is about examining our own selves. And Judy Marshall, who's one of the practitioners in the field, talks about living life as inquiry. So our professional life, our community life, and our home life. And you can do that in lots of ways. You can keep a journal, you can practice Tai Chi, you can do drawing, you can do walking meditation. And for myself, I did use keeping a journal. And when you keep a journal, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So a journal in itself, or a notebook, offers you regular cycles of action and reflection. And because I started this process many years ago, when I took a master's in sustainability and action research, I went back over my journals to find patterns, and out of those patterns to create stories to share. And one of the things you can do if you took up this practice, it is to find out what is happening in your life. And one of the practices I developed was called first-person practice of bearing witness. And I call this Gaia's Graveyards. And I'll just go on to the next slide. So since 1999, I started with my children collecting cuttings from newspapers, hard copies, and recording. I started off cuttings on what was happening to the animals. What happened was my children were interested in animals, but when we started collecting the cuttings, what we found was the animals were in trouble. They either hadn't got a habitat, or they were being hunted, or roads were being built. And when the millennium ended, my children stopped the scrapbook, but I've kept it on, and I keep it on to this day. And I develop a practice in my teaching. I call it In the News. And I ask my students to start with just reflecting on what are the stories out there that interest them, and relate them to sustainable development and also the UN SDGs. So instead of being hit by a tsunami of news, we are bearing witness to what is going on in the world. And in 2020, when Black Lives Matter and George Floyd was murdered, one of the practices made me reflect on my sources, and making sure that I was honouring what was happening to Black communities and marginalised communities around the world. So what I'd like to do as your first sort of stopping point is I would just like to invite you for a few minutes to reflect on any stories that are hitting you, or any experiences in the news, but also to think about their relationship to, do they evoke a United Nations Sustainable Development Goal? So I'll just give you a few minutes now to do that, if you wouldn't mind. So you could use one of your boxes, and just reflect and try and draw it, maybe an image, a stick picture. Try, if you can, to draw, because words are fantastic, but sometimes drawing releases some of your feelings. One of the things that I try and do with my students is I also try and always provide for them positive stories as well, so that they're bearing witness to people in the world who are also doing good and who are making changes. So you may have some positive stories. A Gaia's graveyard story for me this week is the glaciers melting around the world because 2 billion people rely on the glaciers for their water. And I think, Mario, you pointed out water in drought in Southern Europe, I think is a big issue. So in moving on to my book, what I put on the top of this is reflections on creating research. And I use my experience in community development extensively in my belief that I've had a career since the 1980s to 2011 in community development and neighbourhood management and women's equality. And I know that from personal experience that communities who get resources can make a difference and make a change. And I think that that knowledge of the ability of communities with support to make a change sort of imbued my book really. So I just give you on the screen. So Middleton Pride SRB was a £10 million funded project to help a community of about 200,000 people. The Social Inclusion Unit in Stockport, which was a local authority, had a community development team. It had community buildings and community grants, and it also, for a time, had specialist education workers and supported credit unions. And then I was involved with a regional community empowerment initiative, which for a tiny sum of money relatively, it was $250,000 for a population of 7 million, ran learning programs on community development and neighbourhood development. So this knowledge of what communities can do imbued my book, and I think gives me hope because I know that people working together can make a difference. I also do want to say to you, though, that I was very blessed to be able to attend taught learning courses on a master's and a diploma and then a PhD. And I do acknowledge that this opportunity to be part of taught learning is really important. And that has inspired me in my work on action research, that the sessions that I'm involved in offering around action research with colleagues, they're all free. They're online sessions and they're free because I really believe that we need sometimes structured learning. And one of the things about my book, I wanted it to be very tightly referenced because some of the ideas in it people might not agree with, but I wanted them to see the roots of them. And I have put some references at the end of this. So this is really my third stopping point for you. This is an example for me on collective action in communities that makes a difference. So this is an initiative I'm presently involved with where local academics, students from the local university and local people are together planting trees. And you can see the number of the trees at the top. So we started with 47 and we're now at 4,700. So what I just would like you to record, maybe on another box, is are you involved with anything at the moment that feels positive where communities are able to make a difference, and you might be an activist or you might be a development worker, but some example of making a difference. Communities making a difference.
You mean we register, we draw it, or we share it here? Sorry, I did not.
Sorry, we draw it because, Mario, I have so much to say that we can't. If I was doing this and we had longer, we
Good
would
exercise.
do it together.
It's
if you could just draw it, yeah.
It suits me perfectly, just to have it clear. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's good exercise, yes.
And just to share with you in that picture, so in my area, there isn't any community development workers at the moment, but one of the people in the picture, the lady on the right with the apron, actually works in a local museum. We're in front of a local museum, and she is doing community development type work using the resources she has. So this is another example of communities together. This was in a town, in a region in the northeast of England last year that I was involved with, and it was Humber EcoFest, and the local community took action over 21 days around climate change, but also food and wildlife habitat and supporting people. So this is the good work that goes on. So in terms of taking my book out, I've done quite a lot of workshops and I've worked with networks. And one of the things I wanted to share with you today before I go on to sort of my final main bit before we have a breakout is that last November, there was a big science festival in London. It was a 3-day festival, and I had a stall there with my partner, who's an artist. And what we found is we asked there were many, many adults with children and also one day for children. We asked them all to to leave us a message about hopeful futures. And we found a real difference when we just said, please write hopeful futures to the young people. They kind of said, you know, they wanted maybe material possessions. But when we gave them some words, which came from the paradigms I'm going to share with you, we found that the young people dreamed much more deeply about people living together in peace, about using faith to help build new communities, about people living together justly. So what I'm going to go on to share with you now before the breakout room is that I did a lot of journaling. I've been journaling since 1987, and I've used my journals to look for patterns. Is how did I explore living in a wider planet and a wider cosmos? Could I find stories to share with other people? And the first paradigm I want to share with you is when I was a community development manager. So for many years, I was a community development manager and I journaled. I journaled about the work I did supporting communities. And so when I went back and found patterns, these were 4 words that stood out to me: love, regeneration. Now, I would say I use regeneration in terms of community development because all the funding we got for community development was to regenerate communities. Ecology, which is about nature and the planet, and then cosmology is about living in our wider universe. And I found those words really helpful. And one of the things I think you can do when you think about this presentation and whether it means something to you is you could think about whether there are words from your life that make sense to you about what you think is important. And then in 2000, you'll see there's a 2000 there. I undertook a master's at Bath University, which had action research as its underpinning methodology. And so in the 2 years that followed, I studied action research, I studied systems thinking, and I studied participation. And when I wrote up my master's dissertation in 2002, I called putting those ideas together Gaia's equation. And what I found thereafter, as a community development worker, as a lecturer, is that I always try and bring a whole host of ideas together in my thinking. So if we were thinking about planting trees, it's also about thinking, can we build community at the same time? Can we build learning? So it's about thinking in your life and your experience, because all of you are incredibly experienced in what you do, is if you think about what you've been doing, are there some key words that help you live as part of a holistic planet? And then that's one image for you. And then the second one is a much simpler one. It starts with self. So thinking about myself, because for many years I was interested in the issue of well-being, my own well-being. How could I balance being a mother and a worker and a family mother, all these roles, and keep well? And then community, obviously I've talked to you about community, but then planet, because increasingly it became obvious that our planet, from my Gaia's graveyards, that our planet and nature needed more attention. And then finally, the cosmos, the fact we're part of this very ancient universe that's 13.8 billion years old, and that we wouldn't be here but for the universe. So some of you will know that we are actually made of stardust, that 7 billion years ago, a huge star exploded, and from that supernova come the elements that later on gathered in our planet and billions of years later created us and complex life. So we are part of this huge, wonderful universe. And what I did with my journaling, again, this was very much from me, and I give the stories. Anna talks about stories. There are stories in my book that I went back through my journaling and I tried to find stories that helped me make this connection. So, for one example, I gave that I was on a training course, and the leader of the training course asked me to, or asked all the students to sit by a river. And we sat by a river, and he asked us to listen to the river and to see the river as as living and alive and worthy of respect. And then in Part of the Planet, one of the people who has very much inspired me is a lady from Kenya called Wangari Maathai, because Wangari Maathai understood that by planting trees, you took care of the planet, but also you empowered women and local people. And she had an amazing grasp of how it's all interconnected. And then the final one, looking at the us being part of a universe, I tell a story that one day with my family, I was on a mountain in County Kerry in Ireland, and I found a little rock and it had ripples on it. And I realized I was looking at a piece of rock on a very ancient beach. And when I went to the local museum, they said the sandstone rock in that area was 320 million years old. So it gave me a little notion that here I was sitting on a mountainside and I picked up a piece of rock, and here was this ancient history of our planet at my feet. And what I'd like you to do as a stopping point 4 is I'd like you to think, are there any stories at all from your life where you feel something happened to you that made you feel part of our wider planet in this sort of circle? So I've given you the example of Wangari Maathai, who made the leap that through planting trees, you could help our planet. She was very much interested in restoring biodiversity in Kenya. There'd been a lot of deforestation, but also she was interested in community. So, or sometimes maybe you might have been out walking in a mountain and at night and you looked up and you saw the stars. So could you just have a think as your stopping point for me? Is there anything, any story from your life where you got a little glimpse that we were part of this? So I'm going to share with you the final kind of image that I really like. And I just want to take you through it. And I want to say to you, this is what is in the second chapter of my book, because I spent 3 years writing my book. Basically, I would say I spent 20 years working on it. But in the final 3 years, 2019 to 2023, I guess that's nearly 4 years, I drafted and redrafted it. And this is the kind of image of the hopeful futures that I kind of explore in my book. So if you start down at the bottom left, Earth as Community, I actually presented in Dundee at the IACD conference. I think it was 2019. I presented a small paper on Earth as Community. And I think as community development workers, you would all feel Earth as Community is part of your practice or your knowledge that we are all one, that humans are one, and that we are one with nature and with the mountains and the climate. And Vandava Shiva, in her work in India, has over the years expressed Earth as Kinti, and also there's the Earth Charter. But if you move up to the participatory paradigm, I also think that would be a paradigm that you're all happy with, in that it's about participation, it's about community development, it's about the fact that we need to involve everybody, ourselves and the communities we work with, in making decisions and in creating hopeful futures. The top one, the journey of the universe, may not be so familiar to you, or it will be very familiar to you, but you may not see it as part of your community development practice. And in my book, I try to take you on journeys so that you might see yourself as part of this amazing journey of the universe, and as part of an awesome and wondrous universe. And that helps us get the energy to not fall out with each other, to work together constructively, and to work for social and ecological justice. The next one round, Gaia, Our Living Planet, again, I think will be quite familiar to you all, in the sense that everybody, I think, knows that our planet is very interconnected. And a lot of people see that maybe the planet is alive, but maybe if you don't see that, you do see that all our animals are interconnected, and the frog spawn and the trees were all interconnected. And then the final paradigm is sacred earth and cosmos. I found that probably the hardest one to share, because people are very divided about notions of sacred. And I talk quite a lot in my book about things like love and tolerance and kindness and compassion as essential qualities for going forward. But I also think the qualities of awe and wonder about our planet are really important. So guys, thank you for being with me and allowing me the opportunity to share that with you. And so what I'd like to ask you to do in the breakout room, I mean, first of all, in the breakout room, if you just want to say hello to each other, please do. But it would be really nice if you had any reflections on whether these three paradigms that I presented to you land with you at all. I have got more, but I probably got too much more material for the time. But I might just very briefly, at the end of the breakout rooms, maybe when we feed back to each other, I have got a few more slides, but we'll see how it goes. So just before I do the breakout room, let me show you this image. So that's Earthrise. That is what the Apollo 8 astronauts saw when they came round the far side of the moon in 1968. That was the first time we'd ever seen our planet from space. And I love that picture. I use it a lot with my students because to me, it encapsulates that we are one planet, one home. And Carl Sagan, who was a wonderful cosmologist, I do recommend you read him if you can, or listen to him. He said it's our one and only home. So I just go back to the breakout room. Yeah, no, I think it's a really good question. Mario was saying, how do you share these ideas when actually people have such issues like poverty and hunger and water? And I suppose in my book, so that is a plug for my book, I try and give lots and lots of different examples. And I suppose I would say maybe IACD has a role here in how do we share it? Because for me, do you remember the picture of collecting cuttings on biodiversity loss? The planet is in a really bad state. I can't tell you how bad the state of the planet is. And we need to find ways to help people to understand what's happening to the planet, and that we do together need to change. You know, like I do everything, I try so hard because I know the planet's I feel it in my bones because I've been collecting cuttings for 25 years. You know, when we say the glaciers are melting and 2 billion people won't have enough water, that's real. That is really happening. When we say that biodiversity, the pollinators, the bees, are dying because we're using pesticides that kill them, and they just may not be able to recover. So my answer is, I think that is reflection individually and together, and also the resources. I just on the end of this PowerPoint, I put quite a few books. There are lots of resources out there. I mean, I said to you about Wangari Maathai because I think she made all those connections, and she even actually added in spirituality. So she, there are people that you'll find out there who can inspire you and help you. So that's a bit of my answer, but it's the kind of urgency of it all that I try and capture a bit in my book. Yeah. So yeah, that's plenty. Thank you. Do you want what time are we now? How do people want to play it, Anna? What do you think is best? Do you think we should feedback from people? It's 1:45.
It probably would be interesting, I would say, to get a little bit of feedback from
Yeah.
the two discussions, and then we can maybe have a think about what that might have prompted as sort of a way forward. Is there anything obvious that's emerging beyond what you've just actually said? Sarah, do you want to give a little bit of a feedback to what we were talking about in our room?
Yes, I think we spent quite a long time just understanding each other's situations in very different parts of the world, and some resonances particularly came around the participatory paradigm, and the importance came from Ethiopia of community ownership, and the fact that when our world is breaking down and there is no central government or local government meaningful support, then it's about communities really having to do the work themselves and to work in the participatory paradigm, which you also mentioned. And I think Judith was stressing the holism and that idea of Earth as community, and that our communities are of interconnected people and interconnected with the natural world, the biosphere, the cosmos, as you called it. So seeing that bigger picture was mentioned, the big we, as you called it, but that sometimes that can be overwhelming. Where do we start? We see that big picture that you've described, and which thing do we do? Do we want to save the bees, or do we want to stop the ice melting? And knowing it's all interconnected, that whatever we do will have a knock-on effect, can cause people to feel frozen, which is why I think community development is very important, and enabling people to play a role, whatever role that may be, in their own communities. So those are some of the things that I took from the group that I was in. I don't know if any other people in that group would like to add anything more.
Yeah, I'd like to add. Thanks so much, Sarah.
Okay.
So I think the other thing, Helena, I spoke to in the group was how, for example, in the recent past, we've had an opportunity to introduce the macro environment in ABCD workshops, which ordinarily wasn't the case. And I think there was, of course, uncertainty as to how this would land. Ne? And my observation is that it's almost like it's long overdue. It's been long overdue, because this community, the communities we work with, don't live in isolation. And so it almost feels like the connection with the bigger ecosystem has been, a long time coming. The reception has been good. And I think people are starting to locate themselves in the bigger environment. So even as they talk about the many wonderful assets that they have and the many wonderful things that they are doing, the value from those assets and from those activities often has a lifespan beyond those communities. So it's been I think a wonderful conversations for me to be part of, for me to lead. And I think your submission here today has just given me additional content to take into those discussions. There was an ABCD Institute training, a 6-week training held in virtually, but led by South African practitioners, together with the University of Chicago practitioners. And so I was also invited there to speak to the sustainability question, again, which is about opening up the universe and talk about things like that pertain to the environment, that pertain to broader society, not just us as communities. So that's the addition I would make. Thanks so much.
Thank you. What about from our group, Dave or Mario? Would you, or Sarah? There was quite a lot of comments. We were running out of time.
From our group, well, maybe Chiara or Dave could talk now. I've been talking so much. My feeling.
I can start and try to capture. We went in a lot of directions. I think we started maybe in reflecting on what Helena had said and the things that we'd been thinking about and drawing during this session. And for each of us, there was similarities and differences. Connecting, thinking about different times, I suppose, in our own lives where we maybe use some of these practices, or also had that feeling of connection. And then we moved to talking about the work and how to bring this way of thinking and doing into the work. And then I also added, I suppose, in my role, it's about the training of students. So we talked about maybe the value and way of thinking about it when the curriculum is tight, but actually to try to bring some of these broader concepts and that connectivity from ourselves as individuals in communities, ourselves as practitioners, and that connection with the universe. But I'm not sure I've captured everything, because like I said, we went around and about and had very rich discussion. So maybe Mario or Dave would add to that.
Did I what? Sorry?
Would you like to add anything?
No, well, I teased Helena when we just got here with the end of the answer about it. But we just also underline the idea of the drawing. You know, while we're drawing and we are reflecting on things and we are kind of traveling in between different ways or different perceptions that we have of our own life trail, would I say like that, or our own journey. Like, so that's the idea of this workshop as well. So for me, it was very interesting to go back to the drawing, which is like I shared already. So, and I think it helps a lot. And sometimes maybe we wonder why don't we draw so much? Why don't we draw like we were kids? You know, I have a box here full of my children drawing, and in the walls in the kitchen as well. And like they are drawing all the time. I used to do that. I think most of us as children used to do that. It's a representation of the world, of our feelings, etc. And then we start using words, and then the words, they scare away our visual expression, you know. And I think we should go back to that somehow as well, like not only but as well, especially when we're working with communities where, for example, literacy skills are very low, and the drawing, I think, is much more free expression. Like we can, and that's like when we write, most of the time we think like, is it well written or not, or is this the sentence well built? And with the drawing, by the time you say, this is not a drawing class, like we're not here for any contest, so it doesn't matter how you draw. I think it's very free expression of expressing our perceptions in everything that comes in the idea of perception. So we were also sharing a bit about this methodology.
Anna, is it all right? Because I'm watching the time. I have one slide that I would like to share with you all, and just a slide on my book. And then what I'd like to say to some of you, if you think, is this the one to open? Sorry, no, that's the breakout room. Just to say to you that this is a slide that I actually created for today, in that I was realizing that I've now started to develop practices that relate to some of the ideas in the book. And what I don't know, Anna and Sarah and Jessica, is if there's some way that I could have the names of the people, because it might be, so what I did, I've got a paradigm on the left-hand side, and I'm trying to develop practices that go with it. And I think that would be quite exciting if people were interested. They were saying, you know, when I'm working with people, what do I do? And just to say, that's my book, and I self-published. You can get it, probably the best way is to get it on Amazon, to be honest, because whichever country in the world, they deal with all the taxes. But I would be really interested, or if you don't want to buy it, that's fine, get it for your library. Or if you could do a review for me on Amazon, that would be really good. I found it quite difficult to take it out, so I'm restarting again. I'll stop there. But I am interested in this one about practices, what we might do, how we might share these ideas. So that's just a little plea from me at the end of it. If anybody's interested, I'd really like, you know, if it would be part of ABC, if we could make, you know, some of it, that would be lovely. And I do take your point, Anna, about linking to the standards of community development. So that's a learning point for me. Thank you.
Well, I think it's also potentially a learning point for us as well, Helena, in that you know, the standards are there, and they have been for a number of years. But there is also a process that we're trying to take forward with promoting the standards, but also rooting those in, or supporting practitioners to root those in practice, because they are quite context free and value free, and quite, you know, generic in that respect. And I think but they touch on, there's a lot of overlap in terms of key themes that you've been talking about, the paradigms, and particularly the participatory paradigm too. But I kind of, picking up on some of the things that Judith was reflecting back on there, think that it's useful to have a clarity of understanding around what we mean by community development when we're using the term too, because that's open to a lot of interpretation. And if the starting point is a bit muddy, it makes the conversation as it goes further muddier and muddier as well. But I appreciate your thinking about how we might take some of this forward, and I think that's something I'd like to think about, maybe in conversation as well, you know, after today. I think there's a lot there to continue to explore. I don't know if anybody else has any other comments. Mario, did you have your hand up actually?
No.
It must be the cursor that's hovering over your.
No, it's just
it is. Okay.
Kiara was saying bye-bye, and I just said.
Anna?
Yes, Judith.
Could I just say something? I think perhaps for consideration is the possibility of this collective, since we are now we've been part of this conversation, to also add onto that list of around practices, so that it's not just, you know, I'm just saying, it's not just Helena thinking about what their practices look like. That we, as the people who are likely to also now start implementing some of this on the ground, we also build that knowledge. Yeah, I think it's part of growing it and co-owning what develops from it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just put in the chat earlier, if anybody is willing for Helena to contact you, you could leave your email in the chat. So some of you have done done that, then Helena has got your email address, and I've also put the details of the next Researchers Forum meeting in the chat, which is on Thursday, the 26th of June. It will be at 2 p.m. 1400 hours UK time. That's British summer time, so you need to translate it into your own time zone. Though probably we're still the same as Portugal, I think, at that point.
Yeah.
And we'd love to have you along to that meeting. Slightly different timing, might be better for those people in the USA. I see it's got light in the USA now, so that's good, but not so good for people in other parts of the world. And that's with Pradeep Narayanan from Praxis, which is a participatory practices organization based in New Delhi in India. And he's going to come with 2 or 3 colleagues. I think it will be a very interesting session. He also wants us to participate in a workshop style. So back to you, Anna, to close the meeting.
Thank you, Sarah. And I always feel like 90 minutes sounds, when you're online, that it's quite a long time to keep focus and concentration. But there is a part of me with a number of these conversations that we've been having recently where I feel maybe something a little bit longer that gives the opportunity for a bit more immersion might be of benefit too. Not instead of, but perhaps as well as. So maybe that's a conversation that we could have for the coming plan of work, shall we say. But thanks for saying about our next session as well, Sarah. And maybe finally, just to highlight, I mean, one of the other things that Helena has been involved in is the development of a living archive of resources documenting the history of community development activity in many respects from someone living through it and with others over a period of years in the northwest of England. And we're going to invite Helena to come back and actually do another session with us, not specifically for the Researchers Forum, but a broader one that we will open up to everyone who might be interested. Although Helena's archive relates to the northwest of England, the concept of a living archive is something that we kind of think might be of interest to other practitioners all around the world, and how Helena's gone about that, what that looks like, and some of the plans for it. But there just wouldn't have been time to try and fit all of that in today as well. So hopefully we'll get a date for that maybe towards the end of April. And share information about that. And I know that Jessica did put a link into the chat for anybody who's joined us today who isn't an IACD member yet. We would very much welcome you as a member of that growing family. And there are various options for membership as well. And it's very reasonably priced in that we haven't changed it in probably 15 plus years. So it's still very reasonable, particularly for individuals. But please do have a look at the website and options for joining. And that brings along some other benefits as well. I don't know if there's anything else, unless anybody has any sort of final announcements they might like to make that's pertinent to the day. Jessica, is there anything else we need to maybe share? We do have a global community development educators forum coming up.
Yeah, that's on the 27th.
Thank you.
So it's this week. Yeah.
This week, yeah. That's what I was thinking. Is that this week as well?
Yeah.
So that's on Thursday.
That's Thursday, yeah.
Thursday.
That's 4:30 p.m. UK time.
Yeah. And yes, Sarah, thank you for that reminder. And take care, be in touch. But very big thank you indeed to Helena for today's session. It's been really interesting and very enjoyable too, and thought-provoking. So thank you, and very much appreciate it, and look forward to having you back.
Thank you.
And thank you
Bye-bye.
to all of you for joining too.
Lovely.
And look forward to pursuing the conversations.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you
thank
for
you,
your
everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Take
Bye,
care.
everyone.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye.
Bye.
nice,
Bye.
nice
Bye.
week. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye.